Hello, everybody. Today we are going to create a Microsoft Server Core virtual computer and a Microsoft Server computer with the graphical user interface. This is our lab for CNT 211, so let's go ahead and get started. First and foremost, go ahead and open up your VMware workstation so that you have access to it and create a new virtual machine. We're going to click on Custom and click Next. And we can just stick with Workstation 16.2x as long as we're on a Windows computer. If we are using a Mac computer, go get yourself a Windows computer. This is a Windows class. What are you doing? Or click on Fusion 12x or 12.2x. Click Next. And we are going to install the virtual server's operating system from an ISO file. So we need to find our ISO file. So we're going to click on Browse, and it looks like I already have it. It's in our CNT 201 folder. You may have downloaded these files from the link in the class, and you may have created a CNT 211 folder. I'm going to go ahead and copy this just so that I can create a CNT 211 folder and put that information inside the folder for this. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder, ISO files, and paste that into here. Now, the only reason that I did this was because we are running CNT 211, and I don't want to confuse you by going into a folder for CNT 201. Obviously, both classes are using the same operating system files because they're both Windows classes. This process is going to take a little while because I'm making a copy of a very large file, so we might skip past the download of this portion, but nevertheless, we're going to grab our ISO file from the location that we have it saved in. The ISO file should be your Windows Server 2019 ISO file, and then we're going to hit open once we have that. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and open this file, and then we can go ahead and click Next. We do not have a product key because these are just temporary virtual machines that we're using for class, so we're not going to put that in here. And the version of Windows that we're going to install is going to be the standard core because we're creating a Windows Server 2019 core first. The name of this machine is going to be Server 2019 core. And we can just go ahead and put in our password, CNT password, so that we have that already preloaded. Go ahead and click Next. It's going to tell us that we didn't enter our product key, and that's fine. We'll go ahead and say yes, continue. Again, the virtual machine's name is going to be Server 2019 Core. The location that we are storing this, you should have had to purchase a 1 terabyte external hard drive, and therefore that's where you should be storing these. So I'm going to go ahead and go to that correct drive, CNT 201, or sorry, 211, and I'll make my new folder. Virtual machines. And we will select that folder and hit OK. So your drive location might be a little bit different depending on how many USB devices you have plugged in, but mine is F, and then you're going to go to CNT 211 and virtual machines. That's where you're going to be saving this file. Go ahead and click Next. The firmware type that we're going to be using for this is going to be BIOS. We don't want to use the UEFI. Click Next. Number of processors. This is dependent on your computer. as I stated in the introduction video, you should be running a computer that has at least 32 gigs of memory, and it should have an i7 processor. So realistically, you should have at least 8 cores of processing available to you. But maybe you don't have that. So you may want to drop this down to 1. Know that anything that you do as far as dropping this down is going to slow down the quality of the performance for the virtual machine. So I'm just going to leave mine at 2. Number of cores per processor, I'll leave that at 1, and I'll click Next. Now, this is a Windows Server Core edition, which means that it doesn't have a graphical user interface. We already know that from our lab slides and through videos that we've been watching. So we don't need anywhere near the amount of memory that you need for a standard graphical user interface server core installation. However, 2 gigs is still kind of low. So I'm going to go ahead and bump this up to 4 gigs just so that I don't have to run into any issues. I have plenty of memory. Again, if you're running something with 16 gigs of memory, then 2 gigs is all you can afford to give it anyways. But if you have that 32 gigs, then jump it up a little bit so that your life's a little bit easier. Click Next. This is where we're going to choose which network connection we want. We can go ahead and click on Use Bridge. That way we have internet access. This allows us to work on the same IP scheme as our external network. If we wanted to isolate this computer in some way, shape, or form, we could do either NAT or host-only networking, but we'll use Bridge for what we're doing here. We'll click Next on this. We'll leave it with a logical SAS drive and click Next. The disk type, just leave it whatever it's recommended as. In this case, we're using NVMe. And we're going to create a new virtual disk. If we already had a created created virtual machine, we would use an existing disk, but because we're building this from an ISO file, we want this new virtual disk. Click Next, and again, your disk size, this is only relevant to the size of the machine. If you're using that external 1 terabyte drive, 60 gigs is fine for a Windows Server Core. We can leave it at that. We don't need to make it any smaller or larger. And because we don't want to slow anything down, we're going to go ahead and split the disk into multiple files. Click Next. The disk file is going to be a virtual disk that's created. We want to specify where that file is going to be created, and we want it in our virtual machines folder, and we actually want a new folder inside of that, and we want that folder to be called virtual disks, and that's where our virtual server VMD file is going to be stored. Go ahead and click Save, click Next. And then at this point, you're going to see all of the information that we just put in. You can customize the hardware more extensively here if you wanted to add extra hard drives to it or another network card or whatever else. But we're not doing anything here, so we're going to go ahead and close out of that. And then we'll click Finish. And this is going to create our server core virtual machine. And as always, this process could take a little while. So if there's any amount of silence, I will skip past that until we get to the next point that we're going to do. But because this is server core, this shouldn't take too long to set up. Okay, and there we are. We have our Windows Server Core install. Now we can go ahead and shut this machine down. Once the virtual machine is done setting up the virtual machine tools, and we can start building our server install for our graphical user interface. Okay, so we'll go ahead and hit the Control-Alt-Delete button, which allows us to type in our password that we created. And that puts us right back into our server core. Now we can go through the process of shutting down, which if we type in shutdown and a question mark afterwards, it will actually give us a list of all of the different commands that we can use to get the computer to shut down. This is a command line computer. It doesn't have that graphical user interface. So we will need to go through this command in order to shut down our computer. So if we just do the shutdown space /R, that will do the shutdown and restart. We don't want to do that. What we actually want to do is shut down the computer completely without having to restart the computer. So in order to do that, we will go ahead and do our shutdown space -S. That will let us sign out and shut down our computer. Okay, now we have our server core server available, which we will be using in our next lab. But before we can finish this lab, we actually have to create our graphical user server. So we come back here to home and we go through the process again. Create a new virtual machine, leave it on custom, click next, leave it on workstation, click next, install from the disk image. It's actually the exact same disk image, so we can leave it there and click next. No product key, Windows Server Standard this time. We'll name the server Server 2019 GUI for graphical user interface. And we'll give it that same password, CNTPASSWRD. Click next. Say yes because we don't have a product key. Again, change our name of the server to Server 2019 GUI. And change our location again back to the space that we had originally set up for our computers. Notice that when we go to the same location that we went to before, it tells us we can't create it there because there's already a server there. So we're going to get cancel. And inside of our virtual machines folder, we're going to create a new folder and we're going to name this server 2019 GUI. We'll open up that folder and that's where we'll save our virtual machine. Again, we're using BIOS, not UEFI. Number of processors, we can leave it 2. Again, if you have a smaller machine, you have to drop it down to 1. You can, but that's going to make your computer really slow. And with this one, this is a full version of server, so we do want to get this up to 8 gigs if we have the capability. And again, I know that not everybody has all of the memory that they would need for this. I really hope that you take to heart the idea that if you don't have a computer that's powerful enough to do these labs, that you take these labs on campus as opposed to in a virtual environment. Hopefully, though, you have enough memory, so you hit next. Again, changing it to bridged networking, click next, leave it at logical, click next, leave it at NVMe or whatever it is, click next, create a new virtual disk, This one, we're actually going to change the size of this one to 120 gigs as opposed to 60 because this is a graphical user interface and because we do want to be able to add more things to this. Click Next. We're going to browse our location of where we want this. Come back into our virtual disks folder. Inside of our virtual disks folder, we can create another folder and name this one Server 2019 GUI. Open this folder up, and we can store our virtual disks inside of there. Click Finish here, and this again will create our virtual machine. And again, this process might take a little while, so I will pass up the parts that are going to be long, and when there's something else to do, we'll get to that point. Okay, our Windows Server 2019 with the graphical user interface has actually installed now. As you can see, this is a much different image than our Windows Server Core 2019 server. It still is requiring the install of VMware tools and us to reboot, so we can go ahead and click on yes for that. But the graphical user interface obviously looks a lot more like your Windows client than the server core does. So once this restarts, we'll go ahead and log in just so that we can see that the server is completely installed and ready for us to use. And then we'll be ready. We'll be done with this lab. We'll have both our server core and our server GUI available for us for our next lab for next week, where we will discuss our IP addressing aspects and do a lot of testing between the two servers. So again, go ahead and type in CNT password. Notice that the username was server 2019 GUI when we logged in. We will change that in our next lab so that it's administrator like it should be. But nevertheless, we are all set. We have our server manager popping up. Our computer is fully functioning. Not a whole lot of information here on our desktop, but again, we'll change that. And we can go ahead and shut down this computer as well. When we click on the Windows icon and go to shutdown, it will give us a reason for why we're shutting down our computer. This does this because it's a server installation, and servers need logs of all the shutdowns so that we know what's happening with them. So you can click on this if you want to and go through and decide, whatever it is you want, but realistically, we'll just leave it as unplanned and hit continue. So now our server 2019 and our server 2019 core are both capable of running and functioning, but they're also both powered off. You can see down here it says status powered off, status powered off. You want to make sure that when you're done with these labs that you power off these computers because they are using a large amount of resources on your computer, and you don't want to get done with your labs and then try to do something else on your host computer and have some sort of an issue. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video. It really wasn't that difficult. We're just installing server core on our computer in a virtual machine environment, and we're installing server 2019 GUI as well, so that in our next lab we can give them some IP addresses, change their names and other things so that we can watch how they communicate with each other. If you did enjoy the video, make sure that you press that like button and make sure that you subscribe to the channel so that you can get credit for this lab, as well as doing your trouble ticket form and lab manual questions as well, if there are lab manual questions. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video.